What's up, ladies and gents? So $3,500. This is one of the last call outs now. $3,500 of coaching I'm giving away to one lucky winner for the OYB scholarship to celebrate 6 years of OYB transformation program. I just remembered, I did actually call this out back in December or January on the podcast because I was going to do one in January. And just in case you heard me say it back then, that didn't go ahead, right? That wasn't the right timing in the hand. So apologies for that. But now it's on, right? So we're going to be starting literally next week or the week after. So click the link in the show notes to enter the OYB scholarships for a chance to win 3 months of free coaching. You'd be a fool to miss this, my friend. Anyway, let's get stuck in. So I wanted to talk about today about the fact that why I stopped chasing the perfect diet, right? And I've actually formulated the perfect diet for fat loss and overall health. I know last time we talked about carnivore, but let's get into why people fail, right? And everyone's always looking for the perfect fix. They want the answer. They want to really lose weight, keep it off, or they just want to feel good, but they want to find an approach that's the easiest. And that's totally normal in terms of human nature. We always want to take the easiest path, right? And research shows actually the best diet that works long term for most people, right, is going to be the diet that feels the easiest, right? So if it feels like a diet, though, this is the problem, right? So people, when they're on a diet, the only thing with being on a diet is you can actually be off the diet, right? So it promotes the all or nothing mentality, which is what most people struggle with and which I used to struggle with. And I'm going to get into this now. It also promotes bad behaviors because a lot of people haven't got to the root cause. They overeat and emotional eat. They have certain environments, whether that's be hanging around with certain people or just at home, they're keeping those processed foods in the house, or they've got habits and behaviors which they haven't worked on, like eating in front of the TV, scrolling on their phone when they're eating, mindless eating. For example, an example of that is when we go to the cinema, right? We always associate that with eating food and it distracts you, and research is clear, you'll eat more. So I could go all day with this, right? But the bottom line is there's all these fundamental behaviors that people haven't worked on the relationship with food is what I'm trying to say. They haven't actually built that foundation. I'm going to tell you my journey now and all the different diets I've tried. I've tried every single one, my friend, right? And I just realized that I haven't actually explained that to you. I think it'd be really valuable. But the other thing then is like people are confused as well, right? When you think about this, when it comes to diet, you go online. I did a post on this recently. It's very much like a religion now, nutrition, right? You go online, one person's telling you, eat red meat, plants are trying to kill you. The other person's telling you red meat's going to give you a heart attack and cancer, right? So you better eat just plants. And then the other person's telling you keto's the way forward. You got to avoid carbs because carbs are going to spike your insulin, give you diabetes and give you inflammation and all these different things. So it's very confusing. And thank God back then, when I was on my journey in my early 20s, this information wasn't available like it is now because online and social media wasn't a thing back then, right? Show my age now. So my experience, let's get into it, right? So long story short, right, I grew up, with a single mother. We didn't have much money. And looking back, I ate a lot of ultra processed foods, right, because it was way cheaper. But thankfully, my mum, she knew internally, see, mother's instinct. I was drinking full fat milk. Now, it wasn't the amazing quality, organic, raw, cold press. Of course not. We couldn't afford that. We didn't even know back then, right? So I would have full fat milk, right? And I would probably drink, when I look back, at least a pint to 2 pints. So probably about a liter a day, right? Because I used to have cereal and stuff, right? That was the ultra processed stuff. But again, if you just have milk, full fat milk, it gives you all the nutrients you need, and red meat. Basically, those two things, you likely wouldn't, if you just had milk for the rest of your life, full fat, ideally proper raw pressed A2 milk in an ideal world, and grass-fed beef, or one of those two, you likely wouldn't get a nutrient deficiency. I'm not recommending anyone does that, but when I look back, I was having that. I used to eat some eggs and stuff like that as well. And ultimately, I turned out okay, right? But that's how I grew up eating. So my brain had already been hijacked into eating ultra-processed food, right? Like most people. We grew up on the back foot, and my mum, I love her to bits, right? And she did an amazing job. She provided, she did everything. She's a legend, right? But we don't know, and we're not given this information, right, about ultra-processed foods and how they hijack the brain. So fast forward then anyway, when I got into my early 20s, lifting weights, building muscle, looked great, but I was eating garbage, and I could get away with it because I started lifting weights, and I was always an athlete anyway. I always used to play sports, very active as a kid. So when I started lifting weights then, at the sweet spot of age 16 to 17, testosterone levels really high, built loads of muscle, and I could eat whatever I wanted. And I looked great, right? I started building muscle. And when I got to like, say 22, 23, I looked incredible, but I was still eating whatever I wanted. Literally, there was no thought into what I was eating. I would just eat whatever I want. When I look back, I didn't even know what ultra processed foods were back then. Even though I was PTing people, so just to give you, people think that PTs have got it all sussed out. We fucking haven't. Like, the reality is, to get to the level where you're like a black belt in nutrition, where I like to consider where I'm at now, you have to go for a journey, right? And you have to learn about yourself. You have to work on your relationship with food and all these behaviors, because those UPF, I'm just going to say UPF, right? Ultra processed foods, UPF, literally hijack our brain, right? They hijack our brain. They change all the signals. So then we get hooked and addicted to those foods, and we lose the signal in terms of whole foods, real foods. Number one, they don't taste as good when they hijack your senses, especially your taste buds and stuff like that, those ultra processed foods, because they're highly palatable and they make you want to eat more. And the only reason they've actually designed them is to sell more product, right? And make us eat more of them. Number two, again, you then just have no desire to eat as much whole foods because you want purely flavor. And then the only value that most people place on food, if you think about it, the obesity epidemic, is just one thing, and it's how the food tastes. They haven't got to the point where they've got to that behavioral aspect of understanding why they eat, how foods make them feel, etc. Right? They're the kind of behavioral aspects of food. Then you've got the mechanistic thing, which is like macros and calories, right? Which is what I'm going to get to now. So fast forward then to my mid-20s, right? So it was when I got to about 24. I remember my second long-term relationship I had with a girl. Long story short, she used to eat mainly whole food. She used to eat good. And we know the power of social influence, right? So I naturally then start, okay, she's eating salmon, vegetables. And we used to go to Costco. I know a lot of you guys are in America. You'll know Costco, and in the UK where you can buy it. Anyway, I would get all the frozen vegetables. We would get the salmon. We get it in bulk. And I used to enjoy eating things like salmon, vegetables, potatoes, chicken, all those kind of things. I started enjoying eating basically more meat and vegetables. And that was great. And I was like, wow, this is good. I feel good. I started noticing I felt better, etc. Right? But then fast forward to like 25, 26, I started bodybuilding, right? So it's funny how everything goes all circle, because I naturally got to a place where, okay, these whole foods are working for me, even though I wasn't aware of like whole foods. I wasn't aware of, didn't have the education on nutrition. I just realized I like the taste of these foods and I feel good. But then bodybuilding, boom, I ended up then following a restrictive bodybuilding diet, right? And talking of diet, the typical bodybuilding diet we all know is broccoli, it's chicken and broccoli essentially, right? All the time. And it's asparagus. And if you're lucky, you get some sweet potato. You know what I mean? Very restrictive. I got this old school bodybuilder to give me like a diet plan, which had no logic to it, right, whatsoever. It was just basic, just chicken and broccoli. Essentially, this is what you've got to eat, right? So I started eating that. And then long story short, as you can imagine, being overly restrictive, removing whole food groups like I talked about last time, eating the same foods, hating the meals that I ate. What happened then was I started getting this obsession where I would be leading up to shows and I would be making lists in my notes of all the places I wanted to eat, all the restaurants, all the foods I wanted to eat, Ben and Jerry's, Domino's. I'd be making massive lists and obviously built up this poor relationship with food. And then that basically transpired into the binge eating disorder, right? And then throughout that whole period, say age 26 to 28 roughly, I then was obsessed obviously with macros. When I'd be leading up to shows, I'd be tracking my calories, tracking my macros, weighing all my food. And there's a lot of value to that, right? There's a hell of a lot of value to having that awareness. Weighing your food, being meticulous with your tracking for a period of time. That should be a tool though, not a destination. That's a good starting point. It's not a destination, tracking food ideally. But yeah, then what they call, they got a name for this now, orthorexia, where I would get obsessed then with the metrics of weighing my food to the gram. I remember before there was like a grain of rice extra or 2 grains of rice extra, which took the weight of the food that I was weighing to like 201 grams instead of 200 grams. Then I was picking out grains of rice and I was like, okay, this is probably not ideal. You know what I mean? But then binge eating, I had to break free of that. So that's when I went, like I mentioned before, down into the pits of despair, the valley of despair, with really destructive behaviors with food, right? Where I'd stop partying at this point. So I was staying on the weekends. And then even when I wasn't like, prepping for a show, in between shows, it would be, right, the only way I know how to stay relatively lean. And by the way, I couldn't keep my abs. My abs were constantly gone after competitions because of the way I was eating. I was just eating too many calories every weekend. I would, Monday to Friday, I would eat, similar to what I was eating as a bodybuilder. But I remember it would even get to like a Thursday evening or Friday, and I would start breaking. And then I would start bringing in like protein bars, which are like ultra processed anyway. I would start going to places like Greg's in the UK and eating like, I'll just have a little bit of a sandwich from there. And then it would be like, okay, I'll go and have a burger and chips. And then before you know it, Friday night, it's turning into, okay, let's have all these sweet foods now after that burger and chips, chocolate and all that kind of shit. Then it would get out of hand. And then fast forward a little bit in, that's when I started implementing fasting. But the original reason I started implementing fasting wasn't necessarily for health. It was purely for, I've got to cut back on calories, right? Which is the wrong approach to take with fasting. If most people do fasting to lose weight, right? And that's not a good approach. They do show research on, time restricted eating and eating in a smaller window and how that can really help with weight loss. But they don't do these studies over years. This is the frustrating thing. Normally they do these studies over 12 weeks. This person did time restricted eating and they lost 40 pounds. Well, no shit. They're eating in a smaller window and they're eating less food because they're eating in a smaller window, right? That's what happens all the times. 12 weeks is bullshit. Speak to me after a year, right? And then even better, 2 years, 3 years, because it's within 1 to 2 years that people gain all the weight back they lost. So I was doing that, eating in a small window. I was fasting in the morning because I'd eaten like an asshole the night before. And then I would eat, I'd wait till like midday and break my fast. But that was what I did learn about fasting, was really beneficial, is it teaches, well, actually, I got taught what true hunger was prior to that from doing bodybuilding comps, right? Because you really teaches you when you're in survival mode, right? It's not healthy getting shredded like that for a comp when you're like 3% body fat or wherever I was. And it teaches you what true hunger is. You're like, you have to be okay. You have to make friends with hunger a lot of the times when you're doing a bodybuilding comp, obviously, because you're getting absolutely shredded and eaten away at most of the fat cells in your body, right? So then that's what fasting kind of highlighted for me was, number one, true hunger. Okay, I can go without food until like midday. And actually, when I was having that breakfast, that was just habit. It wasn't necessarily hunger when I was eating as 9 a.m., for example, right? So it taught me that, which is one valuable thing. Number two, it taught me that muscle wasn't going to fall off my body, right? When I was fasting, because the typical bodybuilding kind of conditioning is you've got to eat 6 to 8 meals every single day, right? You got to eat every 2 hours because muscle's going to fall off your body. Absolute bullshit. It doesn't work like that. Your body doesn't pare down muscle that easy. And it's just bullshit, basically. So that was that, right? And then fasting, eating in a smaller window, and then fast forward a bit more, then that's when I started really educating myself, and I had to heal from this binge eating problem I had. I started getting gut issues, yada, yada, yada. So then naturally I was fasting, but I was also eating more meat and vegetables, full circle, right? Going back to where I was at like four to 5 years prior to that, not consciously, but just naturally going back to meat, vegetables, eating whole foods. And I started noticing I felt better. I started noticing, okay, when I'm not eating in the morning, I actually feel okay. And then I just kind of started eating my normal kind of 2 to 3 meals a day. I didn't take the fasting too extreme, eating more whole foods, felt better, and then started feeling better and naturally getting leaner as a byproduct. And then we're just going to fast forward to, 32. And that's when I started playing around with keto, actually, when I was, 28 to 32. That's when I tried keto, cycling that, noticed that actually that just blunted my appetite more. I noticed a negative impact on performance in the gym, so I didn't do that for long. Obviously, when you're cutting carbohydrates, naturally, most people are not going to feel as good when they're lifting heavy, especially at that point when I was trying to hit PBs in the gym. So, look, long story short, then got to 32, 33, and that's when I, switched over to the animal-based. Like I said last time, read Paul Saladino's book, The Carnivore Code. A good friend of mine who has a podcast. Shout out to Stuart Cook. He's got the Health Sessions podcast. Great podcast. He is literally one of the healthiest, most aware guys that I know. He's had all the experts on his podcast. And he was saying to me, look, man, and he had Saladino on, actually. He was one of the first people to get him on back in the day. And he was like, yeah, man, we don't really need necessarily to eat vegetables, right? So then I read his book and boom, that kind of fixed some of the issues I had then. But I'm not going to go too deep into that. So now my diet is varied. I essentially eat, whole foods mainly 95% of the time. Most of my food, I'd say 70% of my calories come from animal-based foods, and about 30% then come from plants, roughly, right? Maybe 80% animal-based foods and 20% plants, right? So around about there is where I'm at now. I'm not going to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but as I said last time, I dipped in and out of carnivore, cut that out now. And again, it's full circle. So now it's just like, okay, I eat real food. I feel satisfied. Yes, I fast. I don't look at it as fasting. I just eat breakfast later than most people. I normally don't break my fast till about 12, 1 p.m. And I just eat 2 meals a day. So like I say, I have my, it's kind of like natural. I don't look at it this way. I don't think I'm eating keto, but I'm probably dipping out of ketosis maybe because fasting can promote ketosis. And also the first meal I have is a low carb meal. So it's beef, it's eggs, it's avocado. And I have a bit of dark chocolate, which I know is not low carbs, like maybe 3-4 days a week. And then my evening meal, then I'll normally have meats. It'll be mainly beef normally. I'll have some beef liver, or it might even be, some chicken thighs. I've been bringing them back in lately. I have eggs every day as well, as I say. That's for the first meal. And then in the evening, I'll have either white rice and fruits, or I'll have Greek yogurt and fruits and some peanut butter as well. I have peanut butter most days. I know, oh my God, the carnivore space, you're going to die because of the lectins. Let's not go too extreme here, right? Everyone's different. So look, the biggest lesson I learned on that experience was I kept looking for for the best approach. And, I'll go back to this diet I was doing for bodybuilding, for example. Then I'll do paleo. And by the way, when I look back, I want to touch on this as well. Back in when I met my second girlfriend, I mentioned I was eating, salmon, vegetables. What I was doing then, it was kind of paleo. I forgot about that, right? Because then, believe it or not, I don't think I mentioned this. I did CrossFit for about a month or two. And I met a few guys who introduced me to paleo. So then I started paleo, right? And that was, I was eating whole foods. It's cutting out gluten, cutting out dairy, and eating mainly, kind of hunter-gatherer foods. I say that with the whatever that is. My hands, what's that called again? When you do that thing with your fingers. But long story short, it was, okay, I'll cut out dairy and gluten. And I felt great doing that. So look, no diet should be restrictive though. Again, when I say cutting out, if I'd have known what I know now, it's more a case of hitting targets, empowering yourself, adding in more real foods, consistently hitting a protein target, making sure at least 90% of your food is single ingredient food, right? Whole foods. And it's very tough to lose. But look, this is some value for you now, my friend, right? The reason why, you're probably stuck in the same loop, right? Look, you might be thriving, but listen up anyway. This is valuable regardless. You might be thriving right now. Fantastic, right? But you're probably stuck in the loop of maybe trying or maybe sticking to carnivore. You might be eating carnivore if you're listening to this, or you might be taking some sort of approach or following some way of eating, which you look at as a diet, right? Or you might just be, look, I just eat this way. And then on the weekends, I give myself a bit of wiggle room and I enjoy myself at the weekends, whatever, right? But the likelihood is you're probably not where you want to be because you're growth minded if you listen to this podcast and you want to get better. So you probably lose a bit of weight and then gain it back. Or you just don't get the results you want to get, right? You're like, man, either A, emotional eating, binge eating, or on the weekend, sabotaging, all or nothing. Those things are holding you back because deep down, you're pretty structured and tight in the week, for example, but the weekend, you're kind of loosening up. And you might tell yourself that I'm eating healthy and nothing's working for me. That's what a lot of people say. But the reality is, if you're not losing fat, for example, and dropping weight, then you're not in a calorie deficit. It's as simple as that. So a common thing is all or nothing weekends, eating too much on the weekend. So you may be in a calorie deficit in the week naturally because you're eating tight. Weekend comes around, you loosen up a little bit, boom, you go up into a surplus. And then you if you go into too much of a surplus, you cancel out the whole week, right? And then you're in maintenance calories or a little bit of a surplus in total for the week, which means you're going to gain fat or stay the same at best, right? And the reason for that is there's a few reasons, but these are the main ones. Like I say, it promotes all or nothing. When you're following a diet, even if it is carnivore, you can be off the diet, right? And the thing is, diets don't teach you anything. This is why an example is tracking food, right? It's not the destination. No one wants to be getting an app out to track their food forever. I don't track now. If I wanted to get shredded, let's say I'm never going to do a comp again. I'm never going to do those photo shoots and all that shit again, to my knowledge. I would track even the level I'm at. I know how much value there would be to track it, right? To be in a deficit, because when you track, you will eat less. 20 to 30% less, research shows. I know if I track now, I'll eat less and get leaner as a side effect, right? So that teaches you how to fish, right? Whereas a diet plan is just giving you a fish and it's feeding you for a day instead of teaching you to fish and feeding you for a lifetime, right? So even if you might be listening to this, and let's use carnivore or keto, for example, you say it's working for me. Great. That's fantastic, right? I'm all for that. But if you're not where you need to be, something is missing, right? And you're probably either eating too much, You haven't worked on the root cause, the behaviors. So carnivore might work, but then what happens is maybe a few times a year, or God forbid, you have a stressful event. This is the biggest thing that people don't account for. Like I said last time, stressful event happens, circumstances change in life, boom. All those old behaviors come back, you gain all the weight back, right? So the foundation needs to be solid. I know full well with me and where I've got a lot of my clients, we're bulletproof, right? Whatever life throws at us, we naturally we'll use food sometimes to escape, but we won't sabotage, right? We might screw up for a day or two or whatever, but we're not going to hit that off button. We're straight back on track. Never miss twice. For the most part, we might have a day where we fuck up, but the next day we're back on track, right? Because we never miss twice. And that's because we don't have the desire to miss twice. We don't have the desire to hit that big shiny red off button for a whole weekend, because you get to a point where you're in tune with health. Internally, you feel amazing. You've worked on having coping mechanisms in place for when you turn to food. Instead of turning to food to, eat your feelings, you actually have other coping mechanisms in place, which I'm not going to go too deep into now. But this is where you need to get to, right? And also a lot of guesswork as well, right? This is a big issue with a lot of people. They're guessing what they're right. Okay, I'm going to go carnivore. I'm going to go keto. I'm going to do this or that or whatever. I'm going to follow this approach to this diet. And you're guessing. So you're looking as a diet plan, as the answer instead of a tool for you to learn, right? So for example, weigh in and tracking your food. Then you're going to know exactly how many calories you're having, exactly what macros you're having. But more importantly, tracking is even more important for you understanding how foods make you feel. Going back to the behavioral aspects of food. You cannot escape that. You will never get into great shape unless you get to that foundation, and that's the behaviors around food, right? And it's the habits that you implement with your food, right? So all that to say, tracking is valuable for you understanding, okay, when I eat this much sugar, I notice I get more cravings and I eat more calories. Or when I have this much protein and I get the protein from these foods, these whole meats, for example, I just don't have the desire to eat as much, right? When I eat more of these carbohydrates, these certain type of carbohydrates, let's just say it could be whatever, right? Brown rice, I notice I get a bit of bloating. I don't feel as good in the gym. You start connecting the dots and you have the data. And I always say all data is good data, right? So more examples of kind of why you're stuck is because you're avoiding the hard work and you're thinking the diet is going to get you to where you want to go. But it's always, yes, it can get you into a better place. Don't get me wrong. I'm not shooting down all diets, right? If you're better for following a certain way of eating, then that's great because you're going to be eating more whole foods. That's the good thing with most diets, right? The main good thing is that if it's a proper diet, right? I'm not talking about Slim and World and all that bullshit. They promote you eating whole foods, right? So if you're eating more whole foods, fantastic, right? And you can sustain that and you feel like you don't have to sabotage. You don't have to, like, let's say you eat some foods which are off your diet plan or whatever, and you feel like you can have a little bit, right? And great, you straight back to it. Oh man, I'm awesome. I feel great. Fantastic, right? Because you're promoting eating real food instead of the UPF. It always comes back to that. So yeah, and the other thing is there's too many rules, my friend, right? With diets. There's too many rules. They make you overthink everything and you're guessing. And you have to stick to this and stick to that. I can't have this and I can't have that. I have to just eat these foods. And then naturally then when you do slip on it, you'll feel like you've cheated, or you might still be labeling things cheat days or cheat meals. And you feel like you're cheating then, right? And then you feel guilty afterwards. And then another thing then is, most people follow these diets because they want to lose weight, right? They follow it for that one metric. So they're looking at one metric. And that is their determination. That's how they determine, how the diet works. I get on the scales, I've lost weight. Great, this diet's working for me. There's millions of other metrics that are invisible that you have to work on, like habits, right? To actually be able to sustain it and keep the weight off. And then what happens, the research is clear on this. One of the main reasons why people sabotage and gain all the weight back is because they weigh themselves, the weight stays the same, or God forbid it goes up 1 week and they hit the off button and they go, fuck it. And they turn to food to make themselves feel better. And boom, they sabotage and repeat that cycle. Weight loss and fat loss is never linear. It never goes in a straight line. It's up and down. Always look at weight loss over the space of a month instead of week to week. I've even had some clients who haven't lost any weight for like 2 to 3 weeks, but they've still been dropping fat, right? So it's body composition. There's a lot of other stuff going on in the body. And that's one of the main reasons why people get demotivated, disheartened when they see that number on the scales, and they're attaching the value of the way they're eating or the diet they're following purely to that one metric instead of looking at, How do I feel when I'm following this diet? Okay, what's my energy levels like day to day? How's my sleep? How's my digestion? Right? Because that's the biggest indicator to a lot of things. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. What's my performance like in the gym? What's my mental clarity like? Right? All these kind of things. And how does it feel easy, this way of eating? For most people, it doesn't feel easy. It might feel a little bit easier at the start. Oh, I feel great for the first few days, few weeks, but then boom, they can't stick to it, right? Because in their minds, they're following a diet. And I'm going to go back to what I said. When you're on a diet, you can be off the diet. That's the only issue with it, right? And when you're off it, what happens then? You're going backwards, right? Let's just be honest. Okay. So that's it, right? That's the main kind of points I wanted to touch on there. And just to kind of wrap this up, ladies and gents, right? Let's just like summarize it. So you're thinking, okay, what do I do? What's the perfect diet, right? We all know what that is. It's going to be different for everyone in terms of, like I say, I can't give you the one size fits all. And that's why when I help people, with my one-to-one transformation program, I'm meeting them where they're at, right? I'm meeting them exactly where they're at, how they're eating now, what their lifestyle's like, what their work schedule's like. And then boom, this is what we're going to do. Some people, they find it easy eating lower carbs, right? I find it really easy. I enjoy eating meat, avocado, butter, maybe I'll have some fruit, but I feel good having low carbs. And it feels easy for me to do this over the period of like a year. It feels easy for them, right? Great. And they feel fantastic. Awesome, right? Still not going to be like ideal and perfect for someone for their whole life to do that. Because again, you want to have that metabolic flexibility. But the most important thing, ladies and gents, when it comes to diet is adherence, right? Can you stick to it? Simple as that. That's the most important thing. What's the best diet? The one that feels easiest, right? And the one that helps you kind of thrive. So there's that. And there's empowerment, right? You've got to add instead of subtract. So you've got to add in. I just did a whole training on this with clients called, the Empowered Eating Blueprint, where the approach I took, right, was adding in whole foods. In fact, I even give clients resources and I give them free reins on certain foods, right? Eat as much as you want of these foods. There's no limits. And they're like, great, that's empowering, right? And then I say, okay, even these whole foods, like heavy fats, for example, and this is where a lot of people go wrong when they're eating keto. They get to the weekend, right? So they're eating keto, so they're adding lots of fats and not only having fatty meats like beef, salmon, all this kind of thing, with calorie dense, nutrient dense, but calorie dense. And then they're adding in oils like ghee oil, maybe olive oil, nuts, avocado, whatever, most calorie dense foods you can eat. And then when they get to the weekend, they might wobble a bit and then they overeat. So they're adding all those fats. That's not a good approach, right? So that's what you got to look at, right? What can you stick to? But adding instead of subtracting is the most important thing, right? So hitting a protein target, adding in whole foods, and naturally what happens then is you start replacing, the ultra processed foods or the sugars and stuff with those whole foods, like those high protein, nutrient dense foods naturally, right? And you start avoiding the junk because you feel better. And we're hell bent in OYB at setting targets, right? Protein target. I want to see you hit that target by getting these complete proteins in. And then, here's the meal plan to give you structure so you know what to do. But I want to see you eat some of these fats, for example. It could even be like avocado, for example. I want you to hit these targets, right? So 1 or 2 targets at a time. When you do that consistently, you feel empowered and you don't feel like you're failing on your diet. Because if I said to my client, I could take another approach where I go, right, remove all these foods. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes I'll say, right, let's remove this or let's reduce this and add this in instead, right? It could be, for example, let's keep the snacks out of the house, right? You've got permission to go to the store after you're eating a meal to go and have one small snack, but get them out of the house, right? Because you can't eat what you can't see. And then let's hit this target with protein. Let's eat these foods. Boom. Okay. Easy. I can do that. Let's add in this Greek yogurt, right? Instead of having those processed snacks you were having and overeating, let's have this Greek yogurt with some fruit. Boom. Can you do that? Yeah. Bang. Okay. Great to see that in your food diary. You've hit the protein target. You stay within the calories and macros on average, roughly, and you're feeling good and you're thriving, right? So that's empowering. Add instead of subtract. Obviously hitting high protein. We know that, right? 1 gram per pound of body weight on average minimum. Whole foods, barrier in the way, get the foods out of the house, avoid spending time with people who eat shit all the time because you will eat more shit if you're spending too much time with those people. This is obvious, right? It's got to be flexible, right? You've got to look at, okay, no foods are necessarily off limits, but hit your targets, right? Hit your protein target, track your protein at a minimum. And it's kind of hard. It's kind of harder to go wrong then, right? And then the other thing then is like strength training, right? So rather than doing loads of calories and trying to burn more and eat less, that doesn't work long term. Get your body burning more calories by itself. Strength training. That's how you do that. Lift weights, and it costs your body more calories to keep muscle on your body. So basically, your body's going to burn more calories to have muscle on your body. It's going to cost your body more calories. And the whole pursuit of building muscle requires you to have high protein and muscle protein synthesis. When you lift weights, your metabolism's elevated for up to, 2 days afterwards, right? So your body's burning more calories automatically, even when you're sat at the couch. So you've got to do that. It's got to be strength training and focus on movement instead of like loads of cardio. And then obviously tracking the key habits, not obsessing over calories necessarily, but look, if I want to lose weight, I want to eat better, what does that look like? What habit do I have to be on the ball with? Okay, I've got to pre-plan my meals, right? So I've got to prep my meals on a Sunday or get a meal prep company to help me. You got to pre-plan. Planning is everything. Okay, factor in your workouts into your calendar, right? Each week, being structured is key. So look, I'm going to wrap this up, ladies and gents, with, right, it's not about the perfect diet, right? It's about finding a system that fits your lifestyle and that actually is sustainable and feels relatively easy, right? I'm not here to shoot you down if you're following a certain diet and it's working for you for the most part. Fantastic. But what you've got to look at is if you want to really reach your full potential with your body and with your habits and with your mind as well, you've got to get to a place where it feels automatic and it feels easy, where you can not track food, where you can not follow a diet, and stay in incredible shape all year round. And that's where I'm at now. And it's a great place to be, ladies and gents. Look, if you like this episode, please give me a rating and review on Spotify or iTunes. It'd be a massive help. And I'd love to know what your feedback is more than anything. So do that. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Give me a comment below with your feedback or any questions. I'd love to hear it. Over and out.